got a big question, and it's a really big question. So I think all of you know Jesus, but I want to know if you've really seen Jesus. Okay? I've got 3 questions. Answer me this. What happens if you stay in the sun too long? No, you're in the sun.
Burnt.
You get tanned, burnt. Yes, you're quite nice. It's a nice sheen, isn't it? Nice sheen. Sorry?
You can get a heat stroke.
You can, yeah.
And you have to go into hospital.
Yeah, but you don't get heat stroke by just kind of dashing in and out of shadows, do you? You have to kind of stay in the sun for a while. I mean, you can kind of get like heat. Yeah. What?
Dehydrated.
You can get dehydrated. Yes, these are all very positive things. Sorry. Yes, if you look at the sun for ages, you go blind. Also, if you look at the sun for ages, you go blind. So, what happens if you put a big coat on if you're cold? You get warmer.
You're snug in a
You know, I mean, obviously, if it's the sun, like if you're in the sun in the summer and you put a big coat on, you're going to get too warm because you're probably already going to be warm. You know, these are really. I know at the moment these are dumb questions. We're getting there. Don't worry. What happens if you leave a tea bag in water too long? It will make tea, but if you leave it in too long, who's ever had a cup of tea where the tea bag's been in for way too long, right? You know, are you asking a question or are you?
I'm answering.
Is that a yes? Because I never know with you. So, tea bag. Who drinks tea here, by the way? Okay, if you leave the tea bag in the cup for too long, what I do when I'm here quite a lot of time on my own, I will pull the tea, I'll go and have a wee, because it's always good to do, 2 jobs at the same time. So while that's brewing, I'm off doing something, but then I forget about it and I'll walk off somewhere. So I come back 10 minutes later and I've got a lukewarm tea that's so stewed and so minging. It's like, there's flavour and then there's so there's that. Keep these things in mind because it's important to realise that one thing doesn't just happen. Didn't explain that well. These things take a process, yeah? So if you're in the sun, you have a reaction to the sun, don't you? If you leave the tea bag in the hot water, it obviously brews. And what was the other one? And if you put a coat on, you don't instantly get warmer, do you? The warmth has to go through the coat. Here's an interesting tip for you. If you are cold, if you know that you're going out somewhere and it's like the winter months, put your coat on 10 minutes beforehand because the warmth will stay with you a little bit longer as when you go out. I know, I'm full of all this information. Good tip, you're right. Let me read you something from the Bible. Okay, in the year King Uzziah died, Uzziah, there's a king, and he died. I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. Hey, I'm talking. Cheers. Yeah, but I'm talking. Doesn't mean that you can talk over me. That's rude. Thanks for playing. And the 2 they were flying, and they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried. This is Isaiah speaking. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, and he had taken with the tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, your sin atoned for. This is really interesting. This has fascinated me for weeks, right? Is that in this story, Isaiah has a vision of God, and his response is, God's amazing, I'm not worthy. You know, it's not just an idea of I'm thinking about God, I'm studying God. He sees God. And his response is, oh, well, I'm not good enough, right? I want to tell you something here, right? This is actually a good thing. There's a lot kind of going on in our world at the moment, which is a massive lie. And that massive lie is that you are good enough just on your own at any point, that's it. I've got a phrase for that. Now, it sounds a little bit like, well, that sounds quite negative, Tom. But actually, the negativity is this circular thing, okay? And this is the circular thing. I call this toxic positivity, right? Toxic positivity is when you basically have a supreme arrogance based on your own understanding of yourself. Because how many of you have finished learning? None of you. How many of you, well, no, you haven't, have you? Because you're still alive, right? How many of you have fully grown? No, actually you haven't, because you're not 25. All right? You genuinely, you might have, sorry. Right, you're so tiny. Sit down. I didn't know if you were standing up at all, actually, at that point. But toxic positivity is something that is pervading our culture at the moment. Because what it does is that it takes our attention away from anything else that can help us to put it firmly just on us. It makes you the center of the attention, and that's not a good thing. See, Isaiah wasn't looking at God and comparing himself to God. He was seeing the truth, because when God actually reveals himself properly, or he doesn't reveal himself properly, but when you see God properly in the full revelation that he gives, things change. Isaiah sees God and he changes because he kind of realizes, he has a revelation, his eyes are opened, and he kind of goes, I'm not worthy. Now, what's really interesting is later on in that scripture, there's a bit of an allegory. It's a bit of a mess. I won't go into it because it's a bit like, well, that's quite difficult and quite a lot. But the angel comes along and purifies him. And it's a bit of a symbol of salvation, but we'll go on to that in just a second. But the sin has been atoned for, okay? But he had to be in a position of change. In the New Testament, there's a guy called Saul. There's a guy called Saul in the Old Testament, but we're not talking about him, we're talking about the New Testament one. And he met Jesus in a revelatory way. And he went from being somebody who literally hunted Christians to death to being somebody who was actually a Christian. He saw Jesus for who he was, and he changed. Right? He didn't change because he suddenly went, it's a really good idea, I better do a change. You know, it wasn't anything like that. It was, he saw Jesus for who he truly was, and he couldn't help but change. So this is my question. It's a rhetorical question. Yeah, we're good? Yeah, okay, that's fine. Have you really seen Jesus? Have you really seen him? Because have you recognized that you are sinful by looking at him? I think we might need to explain the rhetorical again, right? Because, you see, God's standard is really, really high. Because he's perfect. He made everything perfect. Through Adam, we brought sin into the world. Right? We deserve punishment for our sin. What Jesus does is that he stands in the way and takes the punishment for us to make us perfect. Jesus is perfect, but has taken our sin so we can be seen as perfect in God's eyes. That's the purification. That's the change, okay? What he requires of us is that we make him Lord because he basically deserves it. So this is it. This is the question I want you to consider. When I say rhetorical, that means that you consider it quietly in your mind. Have you really seen Jesus? Has things changed? Because you can, in the book of James, there's a really interesting phrase which fascinated me when I was younger, and it was this. The demons believe that God exists. That means, and by the word demon, you're probably, they're probably not the nicest kind of guys in the world. They're probably not heaven-bound. They're probably destined for another place. What James is trying to get at is that just believing that there is a God doesn't save you. Believing in Jesus does. But you need to see Jesus for who he really is. And the only way that you can do that is asking God to give you a revelation of him. Because when you truly see Jesus, you can't help but change. Genuinely, you can't. Saul, we'll go back to Saul, was trying to kill Christians. Then he saw Jesus and realized that he needed to worship him. That's the dramatic change. I am not accusing any of you of trying to kill Christians, right? I'm not accusing you of anything of that kind of level, but all of us have fallen short. No jokes, right? All of us have fallen short of the glory of God. And we need to look at him and be changed.